We're now pivoting to more specific policy ideas as we continue our Freedom Agenda discussions with a conversation on climate solutions, including under-the-radar ideas to address climate change. As our agenda states, we believe every American should have the freedom to live without increasing fears of extreme weather devastating their communities. This panel will be moderated by Colorado Senator Chris Hansen, a leader on state climate legislation. His proposal on reducing emissions in Colorado was a finalist in our Ideas Challenge. He's joined by Boise Mayor Lauren McLean, who has set and is in the process of meeting ambitious goals to secure an environmentally and economically resilient future for her city. And Harry Tannenbaum, president and co-founder of Mill, where he has built an entirely new system to prevent waste, starting with food. So, Senator Hansen, I'll let you take it from here.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. A very good morning to everyone. Our fast-paced morning, I love it. We're going to have a chance to dive in a little more policy wonk here, I think, for this panel, which I always enjoy. We're going to get a chance to talk about some of the under-the-radar opportunities to address climate change. And I don't think I have to tell this room that we're in a climate crisis. I think we can all feel it and see it. We just heard about in Florida, right, the hurricanes and how that translates into higher insurance costs. In Colorado, that's wildfires. It's drought on the west slope in the Colorado River Basin that you've probably seen the pictures of Lake Mead. And maybe just as tragically, it shortened the ski season by 3 weeks. Imagine that for a second. When I was a kid growing up nearby, you could ski about 3 or 4 more weeks per year. And so it is felt in very tangible ways all across our globe. And we can all translate that into powerful messaging, I think, in our local communities. The other thing, of course, for New Deal is how do we translate a clear problem into practical solutions? And that's really what this panel is going to be about. Giving some examples of some things that might not be as obvious, or the headlines that you've maybe seen, and then how do we take the federal policy, the IRA in particular, and translate that into immediate action at the local level. And we've got lots of mayors and state legislators in the room, of course, and we get a chance to do that at both of those levels every single day. So what are some of those under-the-radar things? Well, I'll kick it off with a couple from Colorado, and then I'm going to turn to the experts here who have joined me on this panel. I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years working on the transmission grid, which is like the immediate conversation killer at every cocktail party. You walk in, I'd really like to tell you about the high-voltage transmission grid, and then they walk the other way. But it is super important across all of our states, particularly in places where we don't have transmission organizations in place, or RTOs as they're referred to. And that includes the West, it includes the Southeast in particular. But how do we strengthen our grid? Because without a strong grid, all the electrification that we want to do, all the new wind and solar and batteries we want to bring onto the system, it's not going to work. And that, folks, that's the big fish when it comes to decarbonization. That is where we're going to make the most progress the most quickly. So a lot of time on the transmission grid, things like reconductoring, making sure regional benefits are included in the discussion at our utility commissions when often they are not. That also trickles down to the distribution system. We've got neighborhoods in Denver, where I represent in the state Senate, that cannot add more solar, cannot add heat pumps, electrify their cars, because the the distribution grid at the local level needs more investment. So that is also an area where we can spend more time. The last two things I'll mention are things like agrivoltaics, which is how do you put farm activity, agriculture activity together with solar. And we've got great examples in Colorado where sheep farmers are grazing sheep and adding solar panels and seeing higher productivity for both. So some really amazing opportunities there that are super bipartisan as well. And then the last one on my under the radar list is conversion to electric lawn equipment. Denver is severe non-attainment in ozone right now. Small engines are a gigantic contributor to ozone pollution in your local area. And particularly in places like Denver, where it kind of gets stuck up against the mountains, Salt Lake, Boise, I'm sure, some similar things. And so passed a bill last year to create a big incentive for people to switch over to electric lawn equipment, and largely bipartisan. with that effort. So there's some great opportunities here. Get support from the other side. Sometimes you can't say the word climate or carbon, but you can still make gigantic progress in a bipartisan way. So that's what we're going to talk about on this panel. And I'm going to first turn to Harry for a quick introduction about his work and some of the under-the-radar solutions that he's been working on. So over to you, Harry.
Thanks so much. My name's Harry Tannenbaum. I grew up in San Francisco. I'm a surfer. I'm a Gemini. I'm here to tell you not to throw food in the trash can. And the topic of food waste is a really crazy one. So just globally today, these stats mess you up a little bit. Like, we use 1/3 of the Earth's arable land to grow food to feed animals today, which is crazy. Then we grow a bunch of food, and we actually throw away about 1/3 of it. And I don't want my parents to hear this, but I went to school and I paid attention. I learned about climate change, and I generally thought it was kind of an energy thing, but it's also really an agriculture thing. About 1/4 of the planet's emissions are associated with the agricultural sector, and if we're trashing 30–40% of that food, you can get to 10–12% of our emissions being associated with food waste pretty quickly. And it's an upsetting thing because nobody really likes wasting food. But, here in the US, we're no different than the global scale of things, and we throw 40–50 million tons, we bury 40–50 million tons of food in the landfill every year. And this is really bad because when food ends up in a landfill, it doesn't just break down harmoniously. It actually degrades anaerobically, and you get methane, which is kind of public enemy number one in the fight against climate change. The problem with methane, it hangs out in the atmosphere for not that long, but it heats the atmosphere very, very effectively. Over a 20-year period, methane is around 86 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. So if we're going to slow down warming, we need to slow down methane. And EPA is actually doing a great job of beating the drum and raising awareness about this. Now, landfills are a big source of methane emissions, and food waste in landfills account for about 60% of those fugitive emissions from landfills. So a big thing that I'm working on is keeping food out of the landfill. And before you say, that's a really noble thing to work on, Harry, and I'm sure you're focused on grocery stores and restaurants and farms, the problem is actually us. 60% of landfilled food comes from households. And the average American throws away about 600 pounds of food a year, which is like $2,000 worth of food per USDA. So this feels like a really important and tractable problem to work on, and I'm excited to chat a little bit more about that.
All right, Harry, thank you very much. And let's not forget, Harry's got his mini bioreactor there in the corner. You want to quickly describe what you've got over there for us to look at?
I'm sure I'm one of many people that brought a mini bioreactor here. Yeah, so part of the way we're working on this is we made a new kind of bin that goes in people's kitchens that makes it really easy to keep food out of the landfill. And I can share a bit more about that.
Super. All right, Lauren, over to you. Tell us what's going on in Boise.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that are under the radar, but want to tee it off first with why at the City of Boise we are focused on climate impact and resilience. And as we work to ensure that we are a city for everyone, and where everyone really means everyone, we've got to make sure it's affordable, that it's safe, that it's resilient, and in that there's opportunity for our residents for the years to come. And so climate isn't just energy or food. I mean, climate is impacted by everything that we do, and in turn that impacts the health of our residents, the amount of money they'll have to spend to live in their homes, heat their homes, and cool their homes in the future as our days get hotter, and the opportunity job-wise that they'll have in the future as our world changes in response to climate impacts. And so we've done what every city has done, and we've set goals around, as a city government, being carbon neutral by 2030, 2035, as a city government being fully powered by clean electricity by 2030, and we're going to beat that by about 5 years. And then, of course, having carbon neutral goals and clean electricity goals for our community at large a little bit further on, because we want to take what we learn as a city in transitioning ourselves and then helping our residents and businesses do the same. But that translates into a whole bunch of different kinds of work. So the things I wanted to highlight as being under the radar, and so I'll start with what seems pretty simple, and that is doubling our tree canopy. We got to cool our neighborhoods as our days get hotter, because that helps folks, that are outside stay cooler. It helps residents save money to need less air and power in the summer to cool their homes. And so we're doubling our tree canopy as part of the America Beautiful initiative by 2030. I also want to talk a little bit about electrification. We've built a great partnership with our power company, Idaho Power, actually a company that about 20 years ago I led shareholder initiatives requiring them to price carbon risk into their planning. And so now it's great to work with them in a different way as we're thinking about how we address carbon risk for our communities. Their goal is to be 100% clean electricity, to be powered fully by clean electricity by 2040. So I say we're helping them meet our goal by having 2030 is our goal. And we know we're going to get there because we just created, in partnership with Micron, the PUC, and our power company, a new way to build and purchase power in our state. And so our airport and all of our water renewal facilities will be fully powered by clean electricity as of next September. And that's why we will beat our goal by 5 years. And because we're going to be able to beat our goal and know that municipal buildings, municipal government will be fully powered by clean electricity, we're electrifying our buildings. I wanted our natural gas company to be a partner. I want our city to be a lab. Let's partner on clean heat. Right now, they're not quite ready to do that. So what we're doing is electrifying our buildings. Thanks to ARPA dollars, we electrified 3 last year. There are 3 more on the slate for this year. We are no longer building buildings that are connected to natural gas. They're either connected to our geothermal system if they're downtown, or they're fully electric. So that's another piece of this. And then I want to touch on something that people don't talk a lot about when it comes to climate. I think it's really important, and that is housing and our zoning codes. The affordability crisis in our country has had a huge impact on the climate crisis in our country, because as we've needed more homes and we've been underbuilt and folks have looked for where they can afford, they look for homes in greenfields further and further and further out. That means that they have to pay more to get into the cities for their jobs, so they're paying for gas. That makes it harder for us to reach our goals when we look at vehicle miles traveled. It means that they're building into areas that could be used for ag land or other things to create the food that we need, to protect the open spaces we need to help mitigate climate in the long run. And so we just updated our zoning code. It was an outdated, exclusionary 1960 zoning code, took a market-based approach and said, we got to grow together and grow up as our city changes. That'll impact our health. It'll impact how much it costs to build. It'll have great impact on our long-term resilience with regard to climate, the strength and connection of our communities, the walkability and connections to jobs, parks, police stations, fire stations, what have you. And so I really look at this as something cities need to do. It's often not linked. Investors look at the building community as like one of the largest tranches when it comes to carbon risk and climate impact. For too long, cities haven't. And so we're creating with market-based approaches as well as incentives. So if you do affordable housing and you help us meet our climate goals, you're going to get more incentives. And we'll address the housing need in our community, help us meet our climate goals, and ultimately create a much more resilient and vibrant neighborhood in Boise.
All right. A powerful opening. That gives us a bunch of great threads to pull on together. Let me come back to Harry. To continue with the food waste issue, I guess, as you think about your company's work, as you think about this space, what technology, what approaches do you see really moving the needle on reducing this food waste problem?
Thanks. The problem of food waste through a city's lens a little bit is around participation and contamination. These are the 2 big things that are tricky to deal with, and it ends up being a behavior change problem. Because we can build infrastructure and trucks to come collect food and do something good with it, but if something different isn't happening in someone's kitchen, it doesn't have a chance to get out to the curb. So what we're building at Mill, it's kind of 3 parts. First is this new shiny kind of bin that goes in your kitchen. Kind of imagine if people from Apple designed a trash can. And it does kind of look like a big AirPod case, but I promise that wasn't the original spec. And what the bin does is it dehydrates food. Kind of fun fact about food is that it's 80% water. And the water in food is what makes it wet and heavy, but it's also what allows it to rot and become putrescible, which is a good crossword word for anybody out there. When you take the water out of food, it gets really small. So what's cool about that is our bin takes like a month to fill up, even when you're putting food into it every single night after dinner that hasn't been eaten or trimmings off things that you were preparing. And what's neat about pre-processing food with this distributed infrastructure is it makes it actually really easy to manage. And the whole goal around waste prevention is moving from linear movements of materials, which is what we mostly do today. We take food, which is mostly water, we put it in a diesel truck, we drive it pretty far, then we bury it in a hole to create poison. And what you want to move to is circular loops. So when you have this dried material, it becomes easier to manage. And actually, we partner with local farms. We just launched with a farm partner yesterday in Phoenix, Arizona, where uneaten food from the community in Phoenix is going to go back to that farm to amend the soil to grow food to feed the community. But also for areas where we don't have local farm partners, we have a partnership with the U.S. Postal Service. And you can actually put the food from your house that you haven't eaten into a shoebox, and it can ride in a mail truck, not a garbage truck, and get to a higher and better use. That use for us, we recently got FDA approval for it, is using that food as an ingredient in chicken feed. So it's an exciting problem to work on, but it really requires behavior change at the first bit. And that's how we're sort of thinking about building a new system.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that description. Yeah, I think about like my coffee pods that I stick back in the mail. We're already doing this to some extent. Let's come back to our favorite mayor from Idaho. Any other mayors from Idaho in the room? Actually, how many mayors do we have in the room right now? Couple. I see Lincoln, Nebraska. I see Rochester.
The mayors are all in the hallway working.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, state legislators, we can just take naps and super, super easy. All right. I thought we had a few more mayors here, but so I wanted to come back to your point about electrification. It sounds like you've done a huge amount of work with Idaho Power and others, because I've always felt like in Denver and other cities, the franchise agreement with the power company is this great opportunity to make things happen. How did that, tell us a little bit more detail about how you worked with Idaho Power?
Sure, and that's a great point. What we did was we said to them, look, we are one of your largest customers, and we have goals. And we need your help in meeting these goals. And please, work with us as one of your largest customers like you work with any other industrial customer or residential customer. And so what we ended up creating with their partnership, we had to go before our PUC, our Public Utility Commission, and we had some businesses, Meta and Micron, that wanted to do the same, was asking the PUC to allow us to enter into agreements with Idaho Power for the price of electricity moving forward for several years to come, and then Idaho Power would build those solar farms that would provide that electricity that the large customers were looking for. And so there's a lot of work we still need to do with the power company, with the legislature, with the PUC to be able to meet our long-term goals of carbon neutrality. And always that last 10 to 12% is going to be the hardest part. And some of that's going to require additional policy change at the state. But this work that we did with them really is a game changer because it allows our city government to meet our goals and likely exceed them. I also want to point out, the other piece around power as we think about, okay, we're going to, now in some of our city buildings, we're going to be heating our buildings with electricity rather than with natural gas because we're building all electric or we're transitioning to electric. And we're actually seeing the glide path of how that gets paid back being so much faster than we would have expected. So again, more savings for our residents and taxpayers. But we have the largest geothermal system in the United States. It's ground source geothermal, think Yellowstone hot water coming out of the ground. That is what is underneath Boise. And we have 89 buildings downtown right now that are connected to the system. The Veterans Administration is on a system, the state's on a system, and we've expanded our system over to Boise State University, so it has to go under the river. We are now seeking ways to be able to use this geothermal heat year-round and more expansively. So we not only have to care for a system that IRA didn't anticipate because so few cities or places actually have like ground source geothermal the way we do, but we've got to update it, and the pipes with all the minerals get really corroded really fast. But we also want to expand it, and so we're looking at ways that we can use the system and innovate to use it year-round, where we could put heat pumps in the ground or low down. We could actually use it for cooling over time, as well as expand the usage of water once, twice, and now maybe 3 or 4 times before it goes back into the ground. And so really see that as another long-term solution for not only heating but cooling in communities that have geothermal, and really hope to be able to create some funding sources to help us do that.
Yeah, I love the emphasis on ground source heat pumps. Massive opportunity at residential, commercial, or as Boise is now proving, the district level, like the whole downtown. And I think Denver's going to end up in a similar place over time. We're replacing a 1905 steam system that used to be coal-fired. So yeah, great chance for updates here. I was going to mention really quickly, for how many state legislators in the room who are off their nap schedule? Yeah, there we go. That's right. That's right. We're not multitasking. We're focused. I was going to mention something that one of the under the radar things that we've made some progress on in Colorado is this idea of reconductoring. If you guys probably have heard about transmission projects across the country that take 10, 20 years to get done. I mean, building linear infrastructure in this country is almost impossible. I mean, I think about in the West, where the federal government owns a third to more than half of the land mass. Just getting permits from BLM to build new power lines so that Boise can electrify things. We're having the same problem in Colorado, New Mexico, et cetera, really similar issues. And the DOE estimates we need to triple the capacity of our grid to do all the electrification that we're going to need to do for climate. And reconductoring is basically put a new line on the existing tower. And that can be done permitting in a year or less. So just something to think about, where you upgrade the capacity 50, 60% just by replacing the line that might be 50 years old on that tower. So some under the radar things. I know we are getting short on time, but we've got some space for some audience questions. So who would like to jump in? And Jonathan's got the mic.
I think we've got 2, and then we'll probably wrap.
All right.
Thanks. This is really interesting, and I've already texted some policy people about ideas you shared. So how much is that trash bin?
So thank you for the question. So the full system costs about $1 a day right now, and per household. And I'll just take a half step back on that. That's something that we sell to consumers directly, and we can't sort of keep up with demand. Last night, I introduced myself to someone, and they said, "Oh, you're like a Silicon Valley person that wants to work with governments." And I thought to myself, when I was a kid, I never thought, like, when I grow up, I want to be a Silicon Valley person. But I guess that's what I am. The way we think about decarbonizing the economy, and I think the way we all have to think about decarbonizing the economy, is we need systems change. And to have systems change, we need new systems that are going to replace the systems that exist, and they need to be better, faster, and cheaper than the ones that exist out there. And mill, the way we think about approaching a consumer, is different than the way we think about partnering with a city. In many cities today, there are what are called pay-as-you-throw rate structures for waste. This is a really interesting thing to look into if you haven't adopted this in your region, where the waste bill that your constituents pay is pegged to the amount that they send to the landfill, or there can be rebates that are awarded if you do things like compost or divert other materials from landfills. So there are many markets where what we've found is folks can shift down to a smaller bin and actually get something like mill for free. Another interesting thing is there's actually a lot of government funding out there that is viable today. So just a basket of dollars that I think everyone should be aware of is the CPRG, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant funding from the EPA. It's a $5 billion basket of grants that cities, municipalities, and MSAs can apply for to the EPA. And what it is pegged to is a priority climate action plan that you can put in place in your region. And there's a period where the EPA will help fund creating these plans or amending plans if you already have them, and then we move into an implementation period. And the estimated grant size per MSA is between $2 and $100 million. And it's interesting, food waste reduction is viewed as a very viable way to reduce methane. And we actually are excited about food waste being a part of these climate reduction plans because it's near-term action on methane, which is something that the EPA is looking at really favorably. And I'll wrap up here in a second, but the way we think about changing the system, if you take all the food out of the trash cans, do you need to collect waste as frequently? And systemic change at density with distributed infrastructure, like solar or wind or batteries, can really unlock different economics. I think it could be a cool ideas challenge topic as well, for what it's worth.
Yeah. It's a great point. We've got, right here. Okay.
Hey, Andrea McClellan from Norfolk, Virginia. Harry, you touched on this, and maybe Olivia could help us with this too, but at the end of the day, we have to change hearts and minds. We have a lot of wishful recyclers, for example, who are throwing all sorts of crap in recycling. How do we change hearts and minds about using public transit, about walking and biking, about composting, making sure our houses are energy efficient? Because at the end of the day, we as governments can set some standards, but we really need our residents to be helping to lead this idea. So I was just curious if you had any tips of what's going well in Boise, in Colorado, et cetera, that we could utilize in our municipalities.
I find that if I say I'm from the government, I'm here to help. That typically solves the problem. But let's start with Boise.
Yeah, we look at that a lot and we have a community engagement team that works closely with the community and creates as many opportunities to share what we're interested in doing, to ask questions of our residents, and then to take that and help build out programs that we're creating. Because so much of addressing climate, addressing the biggest challenges is really about getting people working alongside you in common cause and then acting in different ways. You got to make it as easy as possible at the end of the day. And then I also think it's important to instill a little bit of responsibility in there too. So we were talking before this about our recycling and composting rates. We're at 97% of our residents. We haven't yet done multifamily, are composting, and I think it's 98 plus that recycle. And we've done that by making it as easy as possible, but also creating this sense of responsibility to each other that we do things, and also letting folks know how much money you save when you do this in the long run.
All right, I think we might be able to squeeze in one more. Can we get to Lincoln, which is where I was born? So I'm going to go there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate all these under-the-radar ideas. One of them, though, it strikes me as a little less under the radar. And so, Mayor Lauren, can you tell us more about how you developed support for zoning code changes? Because typically those are controversial and very difficult to move at the local level.
Sure, and I wouldn't say we did our zoning code under the radar, but it is never enough connected to our long-term climate goals. That's what I meant in terms of impact, under the radar impacts on climate. Zoning codes have huge impact in the long run. We undertook it was a 3.5-year process for our zoning code. I created a citizen committee that was a mix of folks that both supported the ideas, some people that opposed the ideas. They weren't all practitioners. I wanted regular people with lived experience in our neighborhoods to be part of it. Create a plan. The consultant did the same plan that he did for every other city. I didn't like it. The community didn't like it. We wanted a Boise plan. And so had hundreds and hundreds of hours of engagements in libraries, at high schools and parks, and took feedback on it, with maps, looked at neighborhoods and what it would mean. Thousands of Boiseans filled out surveys, and we changed it several times because we wanted it to be reflective of our city, illustrative of our values, and ultimately get to what we need to have, which is more housing, closer to jobs, so that we can strengthen our vibrant neighborhoods and folks have opportunity. And in the long run, we'll be more resilient. Our council passed it unanimously after about 4 days of testimony, but I can tell you that in the spring, there was much more pushback to it than ultimately we saw at the hearings. And it was an issue in this last election. Every council member in Boise was up, as well as myself. Every person that was up that was supportive of modern zoning, homes for families, was elected.
Will you join me in thanking our great panel?